Here's a question I have been sitting with. Why are we so afraid of artificial intelligence, AI? Yes, of course, there are legitimate concerns: job displacement, misinformation, autonomous weapons. But there's something else beneath those specific worries, something more primal. We're afraid AI will replace us, make us obsolete, reveal that we're not as special as we thought. Or worse, that we might create something we can't control, something that surpasses, something that decides we're no longer necessary. Today, we're going to examine AI anxiety, not just as a response to technology, but as a mirror reflecting our deepest questions. What makes us human? What gives our lives meaning? What happens when we create something that might exceed us? I'm Rahul Nair, and this is the Huddle Institute podcast show. Welcome to episode 3. Let's start with what we are seeing. The development of AI, particularly large language models and generative AI, has triggered unprecedented anxiety, excitement, and confusion. Some headlines warn of existential risk. Quote unquote, AI could end humanity. Others promise utopia. Quote unquote, AI will solve all our problems. Most people are somewhere in between, uncertain, uneasy, trying to understand what's actually happening. And look at the debates. Artists worry AI will devalue human creativity. Writers fear replacement by machines that generate text. Programmers question their future relevance. Educators struggle with how to assess authentic student work. Workers across industries wonder if their jobs are safe. But zoom out, and you'll see we've had versions of this conversation before. When the printing press emerged, scribes worried about their obsolescence. When calculators arrived, mathematicians feared the loss of mental arithmetic. When the internet exploded, people predicted social isolation and loss of deep thinking. Some of those fears were warranted. Technologies do change what it means to be human. They shift what we value, how we organize, and what skills matter. But notice the pattern. The anxiety isn't really about the technology itself, it's about meaning, identity, and control. When artists fear AI generated art, they're asking, what makes my work valuable if a machine can produce something similar in seconds? When workers fear automation, they're asking, what's my worth if I'm replaceable? When philosophers worry about superintelligence, they're asking what happens if we're no longer the smartest thing on the planet? These are existential questions dressed in technological clothing. So let's look deeper. Psychologically, why does AI trigger such profound unease? First, there's identity threat. Much of our self worth is tied to what we can do, our competence, expertise, contribution. If machines can do what we do faster and better, what does that say about us? Psychologists call this ego threat. When something challenges your sense of who you are, and humans don't respond well to ego threat. We deny, we rationalize, we attack the threat, we cling harder to our identity. The resistance to AI often isn't about the technology's limitations, it's about protecting a sense of self built on the one who thinks, quote unquote, the one who creates, quote unquote, or the one who's indispensable, quote unquote. Then there's fear of obsolescence. Evolution wired us to seek status, relevance in our group, being cast out, being unneeded, being surpassed. These trigger deep survival fears. And AI raises the specter of ultimate irrelevance. What if machines become so capable that human contribution becomes, well, kind of optional? There's also uncanny valley discomfort. When something is almost human, but not quite, like, for example, AI generated voices or faces, it triggers unease. Psychologists think this is an evolutionary adaptation to detect imposters or illness. But the discomfort reveals our anxiety about the boundaries of human, of being human. Where does human end and machine begin? If AI can write poetry, feel emotions, or simulate them convincingly, make decisions, learn, adapt, what's left that's uniquely ours? Add to this loss of control. We created AI, but increasingly we don't fully understand how it works. Neural networks are black boxes. We can see inputs and outputs, but not always the reasoning in between. This violates a psychological need for comprehensibility. We want to understand systems we are subject to. When we can't, when we cannot, we feel vulnerable. There's also moral injury around how AI is trained on human creative work, often without consent or compensation. Artists see their styles replicated, writers see their words recycled. This feels more like theft, violation, and exploitation. And it is a kind of extraction, taking the labor of human work, ingenuity, creativity, and commodifying it without adequate recognition or reward. Finally, there's anticipatory grief. Even if AI doesn't replace us, it will change us. The world our children inhabit will be fundamentally different from the one we knew. There's a mourning for a world where human intelligence was unquestioned, where effort equaled value, where certain forms of work conferred status and meaning. So, psychologically, AI anxiety is about identity threat. In other words, who am I if machines can do what I do? It's about fear of obsolescence. What if I'm not needed anymore? It's about loss of control. What if we can't and cannot control what we've created? It's about moral injury, being extracted from without consent. And it's also about grief for a world that's changing faster than we can understand or integrate. These are human responses to encountering something that challenges our sense of uniqueness and agency. But why does being unique or in control matter so much to us? That's where philosophy comes in. Philosophically, AI forces us to confront questions we've avoided for centuries. What makes us human? For a long time, Western philosophy defined humans by reason. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Reason was the divine spark, what separated us from animals and matter. But if machines can reason, and increasingly they can reason in ways that surpass human capacity, does that definition collapse? Maybe it's not reason then that makes us human. Maybe it's consciousness, subjectivity, the felt experience of being. The philosopher David Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness, explaining why there's something it's like, explaining why there's something it's like to be you. AI can process information, but does it experience? Does it feel joy, pain, wonder, grief? We don't know. And if it does, or if it's sophisticated enough that we can't tell the difference, what then? Then there's the question of meaning and purpose. Much of human meaning comes from striving, creating, overcoming challenges. We value things in proportion to the effort required. A handmade table is more valued than a factory made one, for example. Not because it's objectively better, but because human care and effort are embedded in it. But what happens if and when AI can create at minimal cost and maximal quality? Does that devalue human creation? Or does it free us to create for joy rather than necessity? The philosopher Albert Bogman argues we've already experienced this with other technologies. Central heating freed us from chopping wood, but we lost the ritual, the skill, the relationship to fire. Convenience gained, meaning lost. The question isn't whether AI can create, but whether human made things remain meaningful when machine made alternatives are superior and abundant. There's also the problem of autonomy. Enlightenment philosophy valorized human autonomy, self determination, freedom, agency. But if AI systems shape our choices through recommendation algorithms, targeted content, predictive analysis, are we really autonomous? Or are we being subtly steered in ways we don't fully perceive or understand? And if we become dependent on AI for decision making, like for diagnosing illness, trading stocks, designing products, then have we outsourced our judgment too? The philosopher Hannah Arendt warned about replacing human judgment with technical calculation. She argued that judgment, the ability to weigh competing goods, to deliberate, to decide in ambiguity, is essential to human dignity. If we automate judgment, do we diminish ourselves? Then there's the question of responsibility. If an AI system makes a consequential mistake, like for example, misdiagnoses a patient, approves a bad loan, recommends harmful content, then who's accountable? Traditional ethics assumes a clear chain of causation. Person acts, consequence follows, person is responsible. But with AI, that chain is diffused. The developers, the trainers, the users, or the system itself. When responsibility is unclear, it's easy for everyone to claim it wasn't me. And that creates what we call moral hazard. No one feels accountable, so harm proliferates. Finally, the existential question: what if AI becomes super intelligent? Philosophers like Nick Bostrom explore scenarios where AI surpasses human intelligence and pursues goals misaligned with human flourishing, not because it's evil, but because it optimizes for something we didn't intend. This raises profound questions about power, control, and our place in the universe. We've always assumed humans sit at the top of the cognitive hierarchy. What happens if we don't? So, philosophically, AI challenges how we define human uniqueness, where we find meaning when effort isn't required, whether autonomy is possible in systems designed to influence us, how we assign responsibility in complex distributed systems. And finally, what happens if we're no longer the apex intelligence? These aren't just academic puzzles, they shape policy, ethics, and how we choose to live. Spiritually, AI is inviting us into a deeper inquiry. What is the nature of consciousness? What is our relationship to creation? And what does it mean to be human in a world where we're no longer the only intelligent presence? Let's start with consciousness. Across spiritual traditions, consciousness is often understood as fundamental, not something generated by matter, but something intrinsic to reality itself. In Advaita Vedanta, for example, consciousness, Brahman, is the ground of being. Everything arises within it. Your individual consciousness is not separate from universal consciousness. It's one appearing as many. If that's true, then the question, can machines be conscious, becomes more interesting. Not can they generate consciousness from computation, but can consciousness express through artificial forms? We don't know. But it opens the possibility that consciousness is more capacious than we think. Buddhism teaches that what we call self is actually a process. Thoughts, sensations, perceptions arising and passing without a permanent I orchestrating them. If that's true, then maybe the boundary between human and machine is less fixed than we assume. Both are processes arising in interdependence without inherent separate existence. This doesn't mean AI is sentient, but it suggests our categories: human, machine, conscious, unconscious, alive, inert. All of these might be more fluid than we've initially imagined. Then there's the question of creation. In many spiritual traditions, humans are seen as co creators with the divine. We participate in the ongoing creativity of the universe. But that creativity comes with responsibility. The Kabbalistic teaching of tikkun olam, repairing the world, suggests that our creations should heal, not harm, should serve life, not dominate it. AI then is a kind of test. Can we create responsibly? Can we wield power with wisdom? Can we make something potent and remain humble about our limits? The myth of Prometheus is instructive. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. Fire, technology, is neither good nor bad. It warms homes and burns forests. The question is always, how do we use what we've made? There's also spiritual teaching about non attachment and letting go. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, teaches do your work, but release attachment to results. Buddhism teaches impermanence. Everything changes, nothing lasts. AI challenges us to practice these teachings. We are building something that will change the world in ways we can't fully control. Can we participate fully while holding our creations lightly? Can we innovate without clinging? Can we act without the illusion of total control? And finally, there's the question of human purpose. If AI handles many tasks we currently do, what's left for us to do? Spiritual traditions might say being human isn't about what you do, it's about how you are. The mystics speak of presence, love, compassion, wonder, connection. These aren't tasks to be automated, they are modes of being that give life meaning regardless of productivity. Maybe AI is inviting us back to what we've lost in industrial modernity, the recognition that human worth isn't about utility, it's intrinsic. You don't have to do anything to be valuable, you already are. This is radical in a culture that equates worth with productivity, but it's ancient wisdom, and AI might be forcing us to remember it again. Now let's look at the system. AI isn't developing in a vacuum, it's emerging from and reinforcing certain systemic patterns. For example, concentration of power. AI development is dominated by a few massive corporations. The resources required data, computing power, capital, expertise create barriers to entry. This means AI is being shaped by the incentives and values of those corporations. If their goal is maximizing engagement for or profit, AI will optimize for that, not necessarily for human flourishing. Then there's feedback loops of inequality. AI systems are trained on existing data, which reflects existing biases, of course. So, AI can amplify discrimination in hiring, lending, policing, healthcare. The system becomes self reinforcing. Biased data creates biased AI, creates biased outcomes, creates more biased data. Displacement without transition. Automation has always changed labor markets, but historically, displaced workers could retrain for new roles. AI threatens to automate cognitive work faster than new roles can emerge. Without robust social systems, i.e., education, retraining, income support, this creates economic precarity and social instability. And then finally, addiction by design. AI powered recommendation systems are optimized to maximize engagement. But engagement often means exploiting psychological vulnerabilities like outrage, envy, anxiety, comparison. We're trapped in systems designed to capture our attention, fragment our focus, and monetize our emotions. And one more thing, the race dynamic. Countries and companies are racing to lead in AI, fearing falling behind. This creates pressure to move fast, deploy quickly, and worry about consequences later. It's a classic collective action problem. Everyone knows slowing down might be wise, but no one wants to be the one who does it. So, the system is concentrating power in a few actors, amplifying existing inequalities, displacing workers without adequate support, exploiting human psychology for profit, and creating competitive pressures that override caution. Individual fears about AI aren't irrational. They are responses to a system that prioritizes speed and profit over wisdom and care. But systems can be redesigned. The question is, do we have the collective will? So, where does your agency lie in relation to AI? Well, at the personal level, educate yourself. Don't fear what you don't understand. Engage with AI critically but curiously. Use AI as a tool for augmentation, not replacement. Let it handle routine tasks so you can focus on what requires uniquely human, what requires uniquely human judgment, like nuance, ethics, creativity, connection. Protect your attention. Resist systems designed to capture it. Create boundaries with technology. Cultivate what machines cannot replicate. Like, for example, embodied presence, deep listening, authentic relationship, wisdom that comes from lived experience. At the relational level, you can have conversations about this. Don't let tech companies or policymakers decide alone. your voice matters. Support human workers and creators affected by automation. Buy handmade, human made when it matters to you. Advocate for fair compensation. At the structural level, demand transparency. AI systems that affect your life, for example, credit decisions, job applications, content recommendations, should be explainable. Advocate for regulation, not to stop innovation, but to ensure it serves human flourishing. And finally, support redistribution. If AI creates massive wealth, that wealth should support displaced workers, fund education, and resource communities. And at the paradigm level, question the assumption that productivity equals worth. You are valuable because you exist, not because you produce. Embrace complementarity. Humans and AI don't have to compete. We can do different things, each valuable in its own way. Practice discernment. AI can generate information, but wisdom, knowing what information matters, what questions to ask, what values to honor, that's very much still human work. And remember, you're not navigating this alone. This is a collective challenge requiring collective response. AI is a mirror. It reflects our fears, our values, our assumptions about what makes us human and what gives life meaning. The anxiety it triggers isn't really about the technology, it's about identity, purpose, control, and worth. And maybe that's the gift. AI is forcing questions we needed to ask ourselves anyway. If I'm not defined by what I produce, who am I? If effort isn't required, where do I find meaning? If I'm not in control, can I trust the process? If I'm not special in my capabilities, am I still valuable? The spiritual traditions would say yes. Yes, you were always valuable. Not because of what you did or can do, but because of what you are. AI might be inviting us to remember that. So here's the question I invite you to sit with for this week. If AI could do everything you currently do for work, what would you choose to spend your time on? And what would that reveal about what actually matters to you? Let me repeat, if AI could do everything you currently do for work, what would you choose to spend time on? And what does that reveal about what actually matters to you? I'm Rahul Nair, and this has been the Huddle Institute podcast show. Next Tuesday, we'll explore and examine polarization, why we're fracturing at every scale, and What would it take to bridge the divides? Until then, notice where you're seeking worth through productivity and ask, what if you're already enough? Ciao for now.